This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? Welcome back to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? This is Raul. Today, I have a very special guest, Matthew Hayes. How's it going, Matt?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right, man. I really appreciate you coming in here today and giving me an opportunity to talk to you about your journey. To start off, I'm going to kind of read your bio that you have. Matthew Hayes is a filmmaker and cinematographer living in Brooklyn, New York. Originally an editor, Matthew explored filmmaking while earning his BA in film and new media studies in Davidson College in North Carolina. While working at Portland, Oregon-based ad agency Wieden+Kennedy, he learned intricacies of client-artist relationships while making content for brands such as Powerade, Coca-Cola, and Procter & Gamble. Working across digital and analog film cinematography, his work focuses on intimate portraiture, favoring shoots that experiment with lighting and texture to create an emotional connection with the audience. And I just want to say, I thought I was going to mess up portraiture, but I messed up Wieden+Kennedy instead. But thank you, man. That's a really impressive bio right there. So, tell me a little bit about, kind of what you do as a filmmaker and a cinematographer.
Totally. So right now, the majority of what I do is as a cinematographer. And so that position, the simple way to put it is that you're the person behind the camera kind of capturing these images that end up on screen. The more detailed version of it is that you are kind of in charge of both the lighting and the camera department and shepherding this potentially very large group of people towards realizing the director's vision. And so it's a cool position that straddles the line between super technical, where you have to know a lot about different imaging systems and different lighting techniques and art. So you have to be able to speak the director's language or speak the client or the agency's language to know like what's the feeling that you're trying to embody with any piece.
Nice. And is that something you've always wanted to do? Have you always wanted to do something along the lines with film?
Yeah. As a kid, I thought my destiny was in comic books, to be honest. And so for a while I wanted to be an illustrator, but then realized sometimes I wish I had a more profound movie that like sparked that joy, but I was watching Bad Boys 2 with my uncle in the theater. And there's the chase scene where they're throwing cars off of this semi truck on the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember feeling just captivated by what I was seeing, right? And like the movie did not age well, right? Like don't go back and watch that movie. But that idea that you could like create this series of images that really just like hold an audience and like draw them in. I think I knew then that like I want to do that, whatever that looks like. And then from there was the process of figuring out what that meant, right? And like figuring out like what the schooling for that looks like. Cause I didn't know anybody who went to film school and then in the end didn't get into film school. So when I wound up at this liberal arts college, I had to figure out, well, what do I want to do here? Right. And then from there, graduated during the recession. So that's another question. Well, now what? What do I want to do? And how do I want to make something of myself? Right. So it's been definitely like a road with a lot of twists and turns that are sometimes super frustrating, but also really enlightening. So,
yeah, I mean, I think all of us, our journeys are always winding. We never know. It's hard for us to always find a straight path, especially when you have very little guidance, or you don't know many people in that type of industry that can guide you and tell you, where to go. And so, I think for a lot of us too, arts isn't a focus when it comes to education or a career. I think a lot of us grow up with parents maybe not supporting us or telling us focus on either going to school or going to work or something like that. And for you growing up, tell me a little bit about growing up. What was were you catered with your arts? I know you're from Houston and you moved around a little bit. So tell me a little bit about growing up and how that kind of affected your path.
For sure. Grew up in Houston, well, split between Houston and a few other cities, but was born in Houston and thankfully had parents who were really encouraging of not just myself, but myself and my other, I have three sisters. So of all of us kind of pursuing some form of like kind of creative passion, right? Um,
Were your
my
parents
mom,
were your parents
oh,
creative?
uh, not by a profession, right?
Mhm.
Like my mom worked for what was Southwestern Bell at the time, and my dad is a high school principal. But she always had a sketchbook on her. Um, she would make some of her own clothes, right? So I would see like the sketches that she would put together for that, or just like the little doodles that she would leave in the corner of notebooks. So in a way, we were surrounded by that kind of energy growing up. And my dad was a big comic book person as well. Like he didn't actively read them because he had stuff to do. Um, but encouraged um, me to kind of get into them as within reason, right? And so was lucky to have parents who liked that I wanted to pursue art in some way, but since they didn't do it themselves professionally, there was only so much there's only so much of a part of our daily life that it could be, right? Um and Houston being, kind of the giant city it is, the neighborhood that we grew up in was fairly far from like all the museums and like the galleries and stuff, right? So that wasn't a regular part of our life growing up. Like we went, right, like went to the MFA, went to the Natural History Museum, especially when they first installed the giant terrarium for like their like permanent butterfly collection, right?
Yeah, nice.
Like
Hmm.
that was something that we like our parents made an effort to expose us to. Um, but I got a homie whose mom took him to MoMA in New York every weekend and would give him little assignments, right? So there's definitely a version of raising a child into the arts where it becomes almost done with the same kind of rigor that you would if your kid was like an athlete.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so when you grew up in Houston, and um, Houston's a big city. You talked a little bit about that. I live in Houston. I think I mentioned Houston, but Houston does have a lot of art and everything like that. But depending on where you is, and then there's a lot of socioeconomic differences between different areas of Houston that kind of limited and kind of prevented people from being able to get all that all that culture, I guess you could say, different culture, but all that artistic culture
Yeah.
to experience and stuff like that. And like you said, that rigor. But you didn't stay in Houston forever. Tell me a little bit more about what happened next.
Right. So, as is kind of the story for a lot of us, parents split up in around the mid 90s. And so, my siblings and I relocated to Omaha, Nebraska for a few years.
And
Um,
what's the art scene in Omaha like?
oh man. Well, I will say, we were in a really good marching band,
Nice.
right? And so there was definitely different things to put your energy into. But as far as like the art classes that I took there, like they're just they kind of were what they were. Um, our mom was still pretty good at kind of making sure that we were stimulated and like engaged, right? So I remember she got me this set of like this kit of like a modeling clay so that I could work on making like little sculptures. And we did like little science camps with the University of Omaha, which was interesting because it's a science camp, but the one that I really remember is that we made model rockets, right? So you're still working with your hands, you're still like creating like these physical objects that kind of let you express yourself in a fun way.
Yeah, nice. And
Yeah.
so how long you were in Omaha for?
Just until like sophomore year of high school, and then from there, um, kind of following work, or we moved with our mom to Berryville, Virginia for like a year, and then ended up in Arlington, Virginia, which was um, which was where we lived for basically up until graduating college. And then after college, in 2009, came back to Houston, and in the middle of like kind of the worst time to be a new college graduate, especially one who wanted a career in the arts somehow,
Mhm.
right? Where there was truly nothing going on, which is where I was very fortunate to meet you, right? Because like at a certain point, I had to crash on your couch for a little bit because there was just it was rough out there, and like you hooked me up with like one of the first jobs that I was able to get after school as well. Working in a machine shop for a little bit while I was volunteering at both the PBS station and this kind of like arts camp for like middle to high school age kids. And then eventually one internship led to another, which took me out to Portland, Oregon, where I was there for 10 years.
Yeah, and I remember that moment when you graduated college and you were around. We met shortly after you graduated back in Houston. What made you move back to Houston?
Honestly, I just didn't really know what else to do. Um, I hadn't really considered grad school at the time because I already had some like student loans, right? And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this again, basically, like go through the process of like applying and taking on more debt. But also, I felt like I was kind of at a weird dead end, to be honest. My mom passed in 2005. And so from that point on, the rest of the college career was just kind of slightly adrift, right? Like I kind of found the purpose and like the things that I was interested in senior year, but that was senior year. And so up until that point is kind of just kind of muddling through. And so when I graduated, I didn't graduate with a plan because I wasn't really thinking that far ahead and like didn't really have the room to do so
Yeah,
or kind of like mentorship to do so.
yeah, and I mean losing a parent, especially in the middle of college or at any moment, it's difficult and it kind of changes you. And you put a good point. You mentioned a good point that lots of times when you're in college, you're not just finishing your school, you're planning ahead. You're getting your stuff in order, you're trying to get your ducks in a row so that when you graduate, you can find a job. You're taking internships if you're lucky, or if you know even to look for internships, so it not doing that and not being prepared, when you graduate could affect you and slow your path, slow that momentum to get you into something more successful quicker. So at this point, you graduated and you're living on my couch. Was there ever a point where you kind of questioned, should I be going through and be doing film and cinematography?
Yeah, but to be honest, at that point, it still felt so far away that I kind of had like the the kind of the ignorance is bliss thing going on, where I'm like, well, whatever this path is to get there, things are so kind of hectic right now that I'm not really sure what that's going to take. And so kind of just lived, feel like I was kind of living in the moment for a little bit until there's definitely a moment where I realized that like I felt like I was going nowhere, to be honest. Like I felt like I wasn't kind of pulling my weight. I wasn't contributing. I definitely wasn't making art in any way. Um, and so, things kind of clicked like, well, I gotta do something, right? Like can't be in here in the unemployment office going through Texas's, draconian system that tries to like, punish people for being between jobs, right? Or being kind of out of work. Filling out these like questionnaires to prove that you've been like searching for jobs or whatever, right? Um, and so at that point, knew that I wanted to re-engage with film somehow. And since I had taught myself how to edit in college at the like in the media lab, I was able to use that skill to like help out at the PBS affiliate. It wasn't even an actual internship. They just went in because like had kind of nothing left to lose and just asked like, "Hey, this is the skills that I have. Do you just need help with anything? Like, is there anything that I can kind of do around here?" And met one of their like veteran reporters named Patricia Gross, who brought me on to this like team of like four kind of like official interns that she had been working with. And from there, it was nice to be able to like be around people who were in media industry in some capacity, right? Um, Kind of quick detour. I did have a short internship in college where I was able to do like a couple press junkets, which are basically like this thing where a movie's coming out and the studio wants to drum up press for it. And so they bring a bunch of reporters to a hotel to interview like the cast and crew, right? And so I did a couple of those and, very fortunate to be able to like be in that position to like try something like that out. But definitely had a moment where I was sitting in one of those interviews. And it's like, man, why am I here? This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing either. And so that contributed to me like kind of refocusing in college to pull out that big senior year. Right. But after then, that kind of momentum went away for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to know what you don't like doing before you figure out what you like to do, and so sometimes you have to eat a little shit here and there to figure out how to cook that meal. And so, and
100%.
it's funny how you're talking that you taught yourself how to edit based off of resources that were available in the school. And I know growing up with a working class family, sometimes we don't have access to every all technology, especially back in the day where, I mean, we had a video camera that my dad bought, and I would do videos with my friends. We'd make all these stupid videos,
Right.
and there was we had so much fun that one summer making videos that we decided, oh, let's make a horror movie. We didn't know how to edit. We didn't have editing equipment, but we were just gonna click the video,
Nice.
click it,
Yep.
unclick it, oh, click it, and we spent all day filming, and we had about 7 minutes of video of actual
Yeah.
recording because there was so much, and we just gave up. We had like 7 minutes of our horror movie that we tried to create one summer because it's just hard. And so I can't even imagine, that not having those resources at an early age of might have affected your path. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think so. Like we had, I think a lot of families had like the VHS camera, right? That like you can noodle on when you're a kid, but that's not quite the same thing um, as having access to like, even the resources that kids could get, or not kids, but like students can get in like film school, right? Where you're like learning on actual celluloid, like how this whole process comes together. And so, yeah, definitely get like there's definitely a moment where I'm like, man, if I could go back to like 2003 and like start this all over again, you have that feeling where you're like, I'd be unstoppable, right? But like, that's just not how life is. So you have to figure out, well, what's the thing I'm going to do now to try to make the most out of like the opportunity that I do have.
and things are so different now where there's so much availability.
Oh yeah,
There's just easy like I'm doing Adobe for this podcast, and I'm paying like $25 a month, and I get Premiere, Audition, like all these things that would have cost me thousands of dollars, just 10 years ago,
for sure.
and it's so much availability. And then you have these apps, TikTok, like people are learning how to
Hmm.
video edit stuff so much cleaner, easier now. So it's just, I can't even imagine if Matt started again now, where you would be in another 10 years, but you still have those opportunities. And so, obviously being a person of color, being black in the industry, I can't, I don't know what, is there a lot of black people, or people of color that do cinematography or filmmaking currently? Or is it
There
more of
are,
is there difficulties?
there are, thankfully, which is, and there's honestly, have been, but the film industry went through kind of this boom of like black, like kind of these visionary like black creators, like these black filmmakers in the 90s, and then all that momentum dissipated, right? Like the studio system moved on, and all of these people uh just kind of went away, right? Like, well, went away is the wrong way to describe it, but all these people didn't achieve the heights that they should have, even though they've created some work that's left like an indelible mark on the culture, right? Like, I didn't know who Ernest Dickerson was or as a kid. This like incredible black cinematographer, um, but his impact is like all around us, right? I didn't know who Malik Saeed was as a teenager, but that impact is everywhere too. And so now, you know, now there's definitely a lot more. there's a lot more black cinematographers, there's a lot more black directors who are like easily visible or readily visible, partially thanks to social media, right? Like we know where these people are, we know like the kind of like incredible work they're doing. And so it kind of it's good inspiration, right? To like you see what else is out there, you see who's doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing. And so you're just kind of always constantly inspired. Within reason, right? Because social media also has the downside of just like you feel this pressure to always be competing with folks in a way that can be very toxic if you don't if you're not mindful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I completely understand that I'm one of those assholes on social media now trying to take over other people's jobs who've probably gone to school for years to do this stuff. And how important do you think, you know, we can break this up into two parts, but like how important do you think like film school will make a difference for someone, 10 years ago or even or today? I mean, there's so much resources. Is film school the best way to move forward, or can people fake it till they make it?
You can definitely fake it till you make it. Um, since I didn't go to proper film school, I will say that it's like speaking from experience, it is possible. Is the path more irregular and like and do you miss out on some of that like practical knowledge? Yeah, for sure. And you got to like make that up on your own. But you know, all the literature is out there, right? Like all the books are out there. Um, thankfully, like so many different camera companies and lighting companies have YouTube pages where they post really extensive interviews with filmmakers or really extensive technical breakdowns of the way that certain movies came together. And then you've got like the staples, right, of like American Cinematographer, British Cinematographer, Sight and Sound, like the magazines that have been these industry publications that have been around forever and are like an invaluable resource too. So you can pull an informal education together for sure. The biggest thing is like you have to constantly be making work and you need creative collaborators to make that work with, right? Like no one's an island. And very much so when it comes to like filmmaking, where it's like, you need your writer, you need fellow writers if you're a writer, you need I imagine you need other painters to kind of critique your work if you're a visual artist, but no one can make a film solo. Um, and so when you go to a film school, you're going to be more enmeshed in that community of people who are all on the same mission versus like a liberal arts college where, everybody's doing a bunch of different jobs. And that's not a bad thing either. I appreciate like you know, some of the friends I made at Davidson, I'm still in touch with, still close to now. Right. Um, one of the guys that I lived with on my freshman hall lives a few blocks away from me now in New York, and
Okay. Mhm.
that's kind of incredible. Like I appreciate that too.
Okay, so we talked quickly about college and the experience of going to film school. Another thing that you mentioned a lot of is do the work, do the work. Um, what are the type of expenses that one occurs while trying to get into filmmaking? I mean, obviously, you're not going to be able to buy the best camera, the best equipment right away, and you got to work your way, up that ladder.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So, traditionally there's a few routes that you can take. A few couple routes you can take when you're getting into the film industry. If you want to be a cinematographer, you can work your way up through the camera department, starting from a camera PA to a camera assistant, to an operator to the cinematographer, or within, and then the order of those activities can be jumbled around, or you can work your way up through the lighting department, because the gaffer, which is, kind of simple way to put it would be like our chief lighting technician. Like they're invaluable to the process of making films, right? And so learning the language and the practice of like shaping that light lends itself into being behind the camera or being the cinematographer, naturally. um and then there's like the other routes where you can kind of just jump right in, right? um there's a cinematographer named Tim Orr who I met when I was living in Portland, and he was giving this master class. where he said that he didn't uh, do a long stint as a camera assistant. He just started um, immediately advertising himself as a cinematographer because there are paths where you can get kind of pigeonholed, like any career. You can get pigeonholed in the thing that you're doing, especially if you're doing it really well. And so, if you are, just somebody who's starting up for the very first time, the expenses that you could incur really easily, or you want a camera, right? Because you want either to own one, if you're not just going to shoot on like an iPhone or like some kind of smaller handy cam, which are still valid, right? That movie Tangerine was like the first feature film where I think folks kind of understood that you can use a phone as a tool in that way. And like Steven Soderbergh does movies on an iPhone regularly. But you also want editing software, right? If you're going to do it yourself, or you want to know someone who's an aspiring editor as well. So that way you can combine forces, right? Um, but a camera, if you want to go for one, with like decent quality that has okay, you can really easily get kind of sidetracked, honestly, into like this gear arms race.
Yeah.
And so you can buy all the toys in the world and like spend all your money that way. Because there's always gonna be something new, right? There's a new camera like every 6 months, basically. And it's kind of a pain in the ass. But really, yeah, if you want a good camera to start off with, at least that so that you can have handy, you're gonna be dropping like minimum like 10 grand, right? If you want to have everything, if you want the camera, the batteries, the lenses, the memory cards, all of like the little accessories that it takes to like wear it on your shoulder properly or carry it comfortably when you're running and gunning places. Like all these things add up really fast.
Yeah, and I mean, you make a good point too about the phones. I mean, we have some amazing cameras on our phone nowadays that can give you. I mean, if we had a phone and some video editing stuff, I'm sure my horror movie would have been completed. Back in high school, 20 something years
Right.
ago. We would have
Right.
we could have made it. So I think it does hopefully give give some younger generations the motivation, the capabilities of being able to. And you see it. I think the TikTok shorts where the guys are like, "Oh, I do cinematography," and they just show up with their phone and they're recording stuff and making commercials for people and just kind of getting out there. So, and I think this is definitely one of those industries where getting in there and doing what getting your hands dirty is going to be the best way of accomplishing stuff. But then
Yep.
you also mentioned networking. How important is networking?
Vital, to be honest, right? Like, you can't do this without a team behind you. Um, or not even behind you, without a team to be a part of, to be frank. And so, one of the things that I'm not the best at, but have to like kind of constantly work at is the idea of like networking, and like very intentionally networking and like very intentionally reaching out to people, especially folks who like I may not have met before, may not have any common connections, but do have, there's somebody whose work I admire, like shooting them a DM, hitting up their agent, sending them a cold email just to like try and get coffee. Like those are things that are that have to be a part of your practice when you're doing this professionally. And then like, meeting friends of friends, right? Like that there's organic ways to grow your network too that are just as valuable.
So it's funny because you say get a cup of coffee, and it's something I always hear people talk about when they talk like movies. It's like, oh, we met over a cup of coffee, and my first instinct is like, I don't know what that conversation sounds like. Like, what do people talk about over coffee when it comes to like movies? Like, hey, do you like my camera? Like, what kind of
I mean,
conversation?
sometimes, yeah, it's like every conversation is a little bit different, which is cool. Sometimes you'll meet folks where you just kind of jump straight in. You start talking about like the work that you're kind of aspiring to do, or the things that you're currently working on, or having some like technical issues with, and you kind of trade ideas together. There's some folks where you started as if it's basically dating. It's dating for grown-ups where you're getting to know a person, right? And like I want to get to know people as people too, right? Because showing up from the perspective of what can this person do for me is that's a shaky foundation to start any relationship on. And it's not fair to the other person, right? Like I wouldn't want to be approached that way necessarily. So why would someone else want that either?
Earlier, you mentioned the problem with getting pigeonholed, which I think is an issue a lot of us have in different any career you are going to. You get stuck on one thing. When I was working, I've worked CRM, IT CRM for a long time, and all my jobs were kind of the same. You know, slightly more money, but it's always kind of been the same thing. And then I got to a point where I was like, I need to try something different if I want to expand. So I took a risk, and I still did CRM, but it was on a consulting side to learn more project management, things like that, and
Yep.
that kind of opened me up. You know, how does somebody in your industry escape being pigeonholed? Pigeonholed. Pigeonholed is a different thing.
That too. Physical therapy. No. Not it's so the this is where it gets tricky, right? Because you're in a chicken and egg scenario when it comes to getting hired to do certain kinds of work. Whereas if you've never made this kind of project before, right? Like you've never worked for a sportswear client or like a beauty client before, you can't get hired by those people because you're not going to have, you aren't going to have the proof that you're able to shoot that work like on your reel, right? And so the only way to do that is to do it on your own, like do personal projects that trend towards that kind of client, or spec work that really is just these kind of like fake. Actually, don't do those. Don't do. I've heard this from like kind of from some of the creatives and creative directors at when I was at Wieden. Don't do like a fake Nike commercial because they don't want to see that. What they want to see is your point of view as an artist, right? And like the things that you're interested in, someone else out there is going to be interested in too. And so don't try to make the thing that you think they want, because by the time that they see this version of it you've made, they're already off that. They're already looking for like something else, right? Because their job as advertisers is to try to find a way of like making the most appealing making the most appealing corporate art possible. And so they're always going to be looking for like what's next, who's next, like, um, that kind of, they're chasing something too. So don't put yourself in the position where you're going after old news basically.
And has there ever been a situation where you put yourself in that sort of state? Or did you ever put yourself in something like, man, why did I do this? I just wasted 3, 4 months of my life, and I could have been doing something completely different.
A little bit, yeah. So there's definitely been times where I realized that I spent too long in one position, which does kind of come back to our pigeonhole conversation as well, right? Where it's like, um, when I was working at Wyden, I learned so much, and it was like an incredible place to be. And you get to work with and like learn from people who've been in the game forever, right? These like really brilliant artists. Um, but like with any kind of boot camp, you got to graduate at some point, right? And so it definitely was at a point where it's like maybe I could have leapt into freelance life a bit sooner, right? But like, I guess everybody's path happens for a reason. I still kick myself for it a couple or sometimes, but now it's just up to me to make the most of where I'm at now.
And that was the program. That was a ad agency in Portland, and
Yeah.
you've kind of been all over the place: Houston, Omaha, Virginia, North
Hmm.
Carolina, Portland, and now currently in New York. Um, for a lot of people, the idea of moving, especially to help improve your career, is a scary thought. A lot of us don't do it, and it could be restricting. Sometimes people do it, and it fails. So
Right.
what are some of the obstacles you had to overcome because of moving, and how are you able to overcome some of those fears?
I mean, the fear itself was the biggest one, to be honest, right? Like because I did grow up moving around quite a bit. I think as an adult, I really valued stability, and so I was in Portland for 10 years and was at a point where I could see that being, at the time I could see that being my forever home in a way, right? Um, Even though LA, New York, where the industry is most heavily concentrated, like those are the places where it may be more valuable to be, right? The thing that really shook me out of it was the pandemic, because production in Portland kind of came to a standstill for quite a long time. And then when it came back different, right? And so that was kind of the final bit of convincing that I needed to realize that, like, yeah, I love it here. This place will always be here, but like I have to do something different. Otherwise, I'm just gonna regret it. I'm not gonna reach the places that I need to otherwise. And even then, like the moving itself is hard, right? I moved to New York with my partner. Um, and she's been, she has kept me sane through this, because like your first year in a new city is rebuilding, right? And that rebuilding process is awkward. It can be really frustrating, right? Especially during the pandemic when work is already slow. You're the new guy on top of it. And so it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, it's like you said, sometimes you'll kick yourself in the ass more for not taking that risk than taking that risk and failing, because at least you try. You
Ah,
never know. I think we talked about I talked before too about the Nolan Batman. Why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And I try to always remember that myself when I do something. It's If I do this, it's a risk, and we all, I think, start off with imposter syndrome, but it will, worst case, it works out. It doesn't work out, and I'll learn from it. And so I think that's kind of a hard thing to tell yourself,
for
to
sure.
motivate yourself, to get through it.
Yeah.
And so now you're in New York, big city. Um, I'm sure the lifestyle is different as far as your career goes, because you're in a bigger city where there's more opportunities, but everybody probably goes to New York and Los Angeles to get into this type of industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How does competition factor into everything as well?
I mean, it's always present, right? And I think there's definitely a way you can think about it that'll drive you crazy, right? Where it's like, every day that I'm not out here shooting someone else is, right? And like there's definitely been moments where, when there was no work happening, you can fall into that thinking trap, and it just makes you even more miserable, right? And so one of the things that I've tried to do is just try to view folks out here as just, well, these are just my other peers, right? Like we're not, the way that some of these conversations work when it comes to being hired for projects anyway is that, like, you may not even be in the same conversation as some people, no matter what. So don't drive yourself crazy worrying about like what they're doing. Like focus on like what are the things that keep me engaged and wanting to keep doing this, while also, yeah, helping me pay my rent.
Yeah. And so when we talk back and we look at all the things that you've gone through, if you could go back in time and talk to younger Matt and give yourself a piece of advice that would kind of help you out, what's something you'd tell yourself?
Hmm. I think I would tell myself that it's okay to take more risks. Um, and it's okay to believe in yourself even if you're going to fail, right? Because growing up, our dad especially expected us to be the best. Like he's a smart man, right? Like he's a brilliant man. Science, chemistry, physics, they come easy to him. um or what we thought of as like it comes easy to him versus like like the hard work that it takes to get there. And so he demanded like a standard of excellence from us. And so I don't think any of us really felt that comfortable failing for a while. Um, and even now, still don't feel super comfortable failing, because like it just sucks,
Yeah.
right? It just it's a huge blow to your ego. Um, and so I think kind of being more comfortable with failure as a learning tool or as a tool to get better, that would be something that I'd try to share with myself earlier.
And that's you've done so much. I've seen some of the stuff that some of your work you've done, and you've gone. I've seen a lot of some of the commercials you've done, and some of the places you've been, and It's pretty cool. It's being
Thanks.
involved with all that stuff. It's really awesome and stuff. What's something that you didn't know about this industry that you wish you knew starting off?
Hmm. I definitely didn't know what the business side of this would be like, right? Because um, I think the challenge of like figuring out your value as a freelancer, um, or even if you are if you're in house somewhere, is tricky, right? Like what rate you set for things. Like how do you turn this into a living where you can actually like afford to keep yourself alive, right? There's like a refrain that always goes around that like a lot of the filmmakers who are really making it come from money, right? Because that was the cushion that you need to like gain a foothold in the industry and like spend those years kind of grinding it out and like kind of surviving. um I think knowing how to knowing different ways to hustle could have been really useful.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned it because when you're a freelancer, everybody thinks freelancers just they think you're taking a job, but really you're running a business, but you're your business,
Right.
and if
Right.
you run your business wrong, your business is going to fail,
Yeah.
because you could go months without money, without work. You could
Yep.
go some time where you got to stretch your budget for as long as you can, and you have to be able to budget and try to get some work. And you have to market yourself. You have to,
Yeah.
do everything that a business does. So
Right. Like your Instagram page isn't an Instagram page, it's basically a business card.
yeah, yes. Nowadays, definitely
Right.
with
Right.
with social media, you have to be super into social media now too. So Um, but Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time out here. It was great talking to you as always. I think one of the nice things about you moving to New York is that now you're only like a couple hours away from me, so we've been able to hang up and catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
And me and you do tend to hit each other up to talk about new movies coming out. So I look forward to continuing that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, man.
I appreciate you asking me.
Yeah, of course. And for everyone else, once again, I thank you for tuning in and listening. And I hope you'll tune in next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.